All right, so some kind of basic things about Python. It originally came out in 1991. It is, in fact, named after Monty Python because the developers who created it were massive nerds. It's a dynamically typed high-level language, so which means that it allows variable types to change. For those of you familiar with some other lower-level coding languages, that when you declare a variable, you need to declare what type of data it's storing. As opposed to Python, where you could say, some variable is equal to a string and then reassign it to a number or a Boolean or whatever, and the program will be fine. So that's in things like Java and C. And I just use this kind of term here, high level versus low level. Who here has heard that term before, high level versus low level?
I have.
I've heard it.
Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between a high-level coding language and a low-level coding language?
When I think of low level, I think of like C, because you need to make everything explicit for the interpreter or the computer. So these low level programming languages are for like usually for like operating system design, whereas like Python and JavaScript are higher level because you can run them. They're more modular, so you can run them on top of things. They don't require so much as much exposition as it does as C does.
Mm-hmm.
That's my terrible uneducated answer, but hope it works.
That's very good. So, the reason we talk about them in terms of high level and low level, the reason we use those terms is it kind of refers to how close they are to essentially machine language. So a low level language like C is closer to being, what the computer is running on it natively, binary code, than a high level language, which is several times removed from that. So at the bottom is binary code, essentially. And high level and low level, there's nothing better or neither is superior to the other. They're just differences. So a low level language like C or Java, it's the pro of them is that they're very fast. So they don't need to, they're used for things like operating systems and also typically used in things like video games because they need as much speed as possible to get as many FPS as they can. But the cons of that are it's very tedious to write. If any of you have ever tried coding in C or Java or anything like that, you need to do everything. There's a lot of stuff that Python and JavaScript and other coding languages of that level will do for you in the background that save you a lot of time in terms of, writing. But low-level languages, you need to explicitly say, I need you to set what type of variable this is. I need you to garbage collect the data, all of that. And then high-level languages, the code is easier to write. They're closer to just, simple English. And so that means allows you to write that code faster. It's easier to learn. The con is that it tends to be slower than a lower level languages because it essentially has to be interpreted by the computer by more levels. Generally, for the kind of projects that most of us will be working on in this program and then most of us will be doing afterwards, we don't really need to worry about performance because we're not operating at a scale where that really becomes an issue. So it's the reason we're teaching you high-level languages like Python and JavaScript is that we want them, it's easier to learn, faster to get something off the ground. And just generally, we don't need to worry about getting this an extra 0.5 milliseconds faster. Chances are after you leave Code Platoon, you'll be asked to learn some lower level languages, but you'll be much better equipped to handle it after graduation.
Noah, do you know if any of the alumni who are working at those trading firms are working in some of these lower level language? Like, does speed matter enough in that situation? Do you know?
I believe we have a few graduates who are working with Java. Java is still very popular. And when you're working with very big firms and thinking like a JP Morgan Chase, when they have millions and millions of users who are relying on them to get them their data very, very quickly, then speed is of the essence. But if you're working for like a smaller firm that's making a web application, chances are you don't necessarily need to optimize for speed to that degree because you don't have, you're not an international banking firm.
Also, with the trading companies, most of them are in Python, but there are some other languages. You're not going to be writing the algorithms to execute the trades. You're more likely going to be utilizing some internal or creating some internal application to help some sort of process not related to the actual physical trades. It might just be, hey, like some of the traders might need an application to show data analytics, and you might have to develop that, or it could be some other back-end tech spec. But I know Jordan is working in Python and Flask, I think, at the moment with one of the TAs.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. So I have a document here. I'm going to open it up.
Sorry, and one last thing on that topic. Are there any tools that we'll learn over the course of this where we can check to see like the speed or like effectiveness of an algorithm that we design? Like if we're kind of comparing two different methods of executing something?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, I don't remember off the top of my head what those are. But there are extensions you can get for both Python and JavaScript that will evaluate how quickly something runs.
Thanks.
Run. Was somebody just talking? I heard something, but it was very faint.
I think that's background noise.
Okay, cool. My headphones are janky as hell, so there's a good chance I might not hear you, which is why I keep on asking people to speak up. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Python. Most important thing to remember about Python is proper indentation is absolutely mandatory. JavaScript, you could write everything on one line, it would work just fine. Python doesn't let you do that. So always make sure that you're consistent with your indentation. That's the first thing I always check if something fails to work is, okay, did I indent everything properly? All right, some things about Python. Arithmetic, basic math is pretty much the same in every language. So 1 + 1 is still going to equal 2. We do Python, subtraction, multiplication, division, Python lets you do division that lets you round down. So, kind of what we did with JavaScript, math.floor. In Python, you can just do 6//5, and it'll round it down automatically. So if I run this, I got 2, 1, 6. 6 divided by 3 gave me 2.0, and then 6 divided by 5 rounded down gave me 1. We also have exponents, so 2 to the 5th power, and modulus, which again is if I do 5 modulo 2, that should give me a remainder of 1 because 2 goes into 5 2 times with a remainder of 1.
Noah, is there a way to do the division but round up?
Good question.
I don't think there's a shorthand way. There might be a built-in method to have to round up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head, but there is a way to round up automatically. I just don't know if there's a shorthand way like there is for the round down version.
Isn't it .ceil?
Yeah, so if I did something like 5 divided by 2.cil.
Yeah, you might have to import math for that.
Let's find out.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think it's a library you need to import. So math I could probably say from math import CEIL. I'm not using it correctly, but
I think
Yeah,
it's
math.seal, and then you would pass the 5.2 inside. So yeah, math.seal, and then parentheses to the right of the seal,
Mhm.
and then whatever values. Yep, right there. Yep, but you have to do math.seal.
well, you normally would, if I did import math, then I would do math.seal, but the syntax I use up here is from the math library, import CEIL. So this is a cool thing that Python allows us to do, is if you know the name of a specific method from a library and that's all you need, you can just import that method and that method alone. And that's one of the reasons that Python is so popular as a coding language, is it's got so many libraries natively. Python itself is pretty lightweight, but it's got all these libraries you can import, and you can import only what you need, so you don't need to import the entire math library if you only want one or two methods.
So we're not getting that library like from the internet or anything. That's already in the complete Python package that we downloaded.
Yep.
That's nice. That's handy.
Yeah. It's very cool. All right. Any other questions about math in Python?
I actually have a quick question on that.
Mhm.
So since like math is already in the package of Python, why is it necessary to like import it or like to call it at the top first? I've just always kind of wondered that.
Good question. I mean, short answer is it's because that's how the Python developers want it. But longer answer is I'm not super sure why they've chosen this pattern. My guess it has something to do with just wanting to not use more, like essentially store more methods than you need. So, the math library is huge. It's got tons of methods that only come up every now and then. So I'm assuming that the Python developers probably said, okay, we can kind of store this off in another area in memory and only access it if it's needed. But that's speculation mostly on my part.
Sounds good to me. Appreciate it.
No problem. Okay. So variables in Python work almost the same way as in JavaScript. You just don't need to use let or anything like that. So you can say, name equals Noah. You don't need to say let's const, anything like that. It just automatically creates it. Always remember to use equals, not equals, because assignment is just one equal sign. And one thing to keep in mind about Python is they prefer everything to be snake cased. So that's everything's lowercase, and then words are separated by underscores. So first underscore name is Noah. It won't break if you use the other way that JavaScript uses, camel case. It'll still work just fine. But it's just considered kind of good practice and to use a snake case, because that way you're being consistent with everything everyone else is doing. But again, you can call a variable almost anything you want. All right, so strings, you can use double quotes or single quotes. They both work. So I could do first name Noah, last name equals Heinrich. There's nothing here that would prevent these strings from being any different. The reason that we use the different reason we have these are kind of two reasons. So first off, if you ever want to use an apostrophe, you'd want to use double quotes around that. So I do quotation. So if I do single quotes here and say that's doesn't work anymore. That's why you have double quotes to say. And likewise, if you put double quotes inside of single quotes, that allow you to use quotation marks like that. And the other difference is whether or not we want to interpolate anything. So if I want to say something like, whenever you want to interpolate something, meaning putting a variable inside of a string, you want to use double quotes. So for example, I could say, so you use the letter F there to signify that you're doing string interpolation. Then you'd say, my first name is first name. So whenever you want to interpolate something with a string, you say F, then you put your string in double quotes. Then anything you want to interpolate, you can just put inside brackets like so.
Is there like a word or something that the F refers to help remember?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat it?
Is there a word or something that the F refers to help remember?
Probably,
Like
but I
format
forgot.
string. Yeah, F for format string.
Oh, thank you. Format string.
Can you also do triple quotes to do line breaks?
Yes. So, well, not line breaks, but yeah, if you do triple quotes, and then anything in between there, it'll print explicitly how you format it.
Yeah. So block quotation.
Yep. Correct. Yeah. Sorry. Block.
Yeah. So that will let you say. So yeah, that allows you to do multiple lines like so if you want to do it that way, is using triple quotes. All right. Yeah. And an important thing to keep in mind about Python strings is that they are immutable, meaning you can't change them in any way. You can't necessarily change them. Because in other coding languages, you could do something like, you can say first name 0 equals G. And then you'd be able to say it would just reassign that first letter to something else. But if I do it like this, it says right here, str object does not support item assignment. So you can access the first letter by using kind of like it's an array, using that notation like so, but you can't reassign a letter. All right, any questions about strings?
Hey, Noah, Heather again. So hypothetically speaking, if you have a string that has, say, a quotation in it, and it also has an apostrophe, is there a way to like escape that character?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
So if I wanted to do something like, let me think about this for a second. So I did, again. So as you can see here, it breaks automatically.
Mm-hmm.
But I can do, I believe, like so.
Thank you.
No problem.
I have a question with the terminal.
Mm-hmm.
Where it says number 1 bash, there's a drop down for Python. Does it matter when we're using that? Mine has it. I don't know.
Yeah, mine does that. It'll automatically go to like Python sometimes for me, and I don't know. And it'll even say Python. Yeah, mine will say Python, but it won't be like because that's the Python shell right there. Sometimes mine will say Python, and it'll still look and act like bash. Is that what you're talking about, Frankie?
Yeah, mine's at bash right now, but sometimes it wants to switch over. I don't know exactly why.
I've just been closing out VS Code and reopening it when it happens to me, and then it seems to work fine. I don't know if it's a bug or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's not something I've run into personally, but I'll look into it.
I'll take a screenshot next time it happens to me.
Okay, so moving on, numbers similar to most languages. So an integer is a whole number. A float is a decimal. And if I do like so, I believe it should have no problem adding them up. Let's find out. So it automatically made the result into a float. So if you ever need integers, you've got a float. If you ever need decimals, you use a float. If you don't, you use an integer. You can convert between them using Python, some of Python's internal methods. I believe it's like so. So you can convert between them pretty easily. Booleans, it's true and false with a capital T, E, and F. Works the same as in most languages. True is true, false is false. Don't really know what else to tell you there. Comments in Python start with a hashtag, or a pound sign. So if you ever want to leave comments at the end, you can always do that. It's useful for pseudocoding and leaving notes for other developers. So comment often, because it's always good you're not going to be the last person using your code in all likeliness once you go out into the professional world. And the more comments you leave that are helpful, the more other developers will appreciate you. All right, I've been using the print statement pretty liberally here. It's the same thing as JavaScript's console.log. If you ever want to get something, they have something called input. So user response equals input. And then you say what the query is. How are you today? And then afterwards, we can print out the user response. Like so. So it's a bit simpler than JavaScript's way of doing it. All right. Any questions on what I've been talking about so far? Yeah, I know most of this is stuff you've covered before, I know, during the pre-work, but again, always good to go over it.
Hey, no, Gio here, like, quick question. How do you do a multi-line comment on Python again?
Good question. What is it?
It's 3 quotation marks in a row. It could be single or double quotes.
Mm-hmm.
And then that'll block it out. And then if you put it below, yep. And then your comment will be between those.
Mm-hmm. It's not evaluating like a comment.
I have a question. Just curious about I was reading this book about the my MTA qualification. There's like an exam for Python. It's 98-381. Is like anybody done that, or anybody any familiar with that?
I can't say I am familiar with it.
So yeah, the comments are different than the triple quotes. So a multi-line comment is
I'm reading online, it says Python doesn't really have a good way to multi-line comment.
yeah, so you just type in whatever comments you want, and then you just comment out that entire everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so essentially, when you're doing a block thing like this, you are creating a block string that's not really being saved as a variable, but so it essentially works as a comment, but it's not a comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, but no, I'm not familiar with the with that evaluation either, but that's interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So now let's go over some of the kind of more logical things in Python. Python's got loops like every coding language. The two kind of loops you'll be using the most often are while loops and for loops. So I could do something like age equals 12, while age is less than 21, and then you put a colon there. And general rule of thumb is anytime you see a colon, it means the next line needs to be indented. So I can say, print out, you're not old enough, you're only age years old, come back when you're older. Of course, I don't want to run this as is, right?
Right, it'll run forever.
Yeah, this will, if as is, it'll cause an infinite loop because age will remain 12 and never get over 21. So you need to always make sure that you have some condition to escape your loop, otherwise it'll just go forever. So you're 12 years old, you're only 13 years old, etc. So while loops are good if you need to say, all right, I need something to repeat over and over while a certain condition is true or is false. A for loop, it goes a bit different because for loops are used for iteration, meaning going over usually a data structure like a list or a strict tuple or a string, etc. So if I can make a list of fruits, so apple, banana, and cherry, then I can say for fruit in fruits, print out fruit. And that'll go over this list, every item, and then do something to based on every item in the list. Apple, banana, cherry. And one thing I really like about Python as well, I'm going to comment all of this out so we just don't print it all over and over and over again, is they have a very simple way of checking if an item is in a list. So I do names equal John, Noah, and Tom. I can just say, is Noah in names? And it would return true. So the in operator is very useful in Python. All right, what questions do you have about looping in Python?
Should we put anything at the end of the lines, like in JavaScript?
Nope.
No.
Python doesn't require semicolons or anything at the end of lines. Python operates entirely by line breaks to know when a line ends. So that's why Python is very sensitive when it comes to things like indentation and stuff like that, because that's how it defines where a line ends and where a block begins and ends. So you don't need semicolons or anything.
On your for in loop there, the first fruit that you have there for fruit, that can be any word. It doesn't know that those are fruits, right? It could be I or shoes or anything. That's
exactly right. So this word right here is defining a variable to represent each item in the array. So I could call this thingy, and it would still know what I was talking about because all this is whatever shows up here. I was just using fruit because it's good to be explicit about, okay, what does this represent? Yes?
When does it stop being, is it only fruit inside that block, inside that indentation, that variable?
Yes. So if I comment this out, and then get out of the block and try to print fruit, I believe it should break. Oh, or not. Interesting. So it looks like that variable is made global. Huh, that doesn't seem right, but I can't, that's what it's saying.
Why did it only print the last index?
Yeah, it printed the last thing because that was the last thing that fruit got assigned to. But I guess in this particular case, yeah. But if I did something like, if I define something called other fruit inside the block, oh, it still works. Okay. Obviously, I don't know quite as much about Python scope as I thought I did. Well, that's something new I learned. Thanks. So it looks like that these are globally available. Okay.
That is odd.
Yeah.
Well, luckily it's Python, so you can just reassign it pretty easily.
Yeah. That's a good thing about Python is, yeah, we could just say, okay, now I want fruit here to be pineapple, and that won't cause any issues.
Would it work if you indented the for loop?
Would what work if I indented the for loop?
Like, would it run?
If I did this?
Yeah.
Indentation error. You need to be very careful with this. So essentially don't indent until the line after you get a colon. And then everything after that colon that is indented will be considered to be part of this for loop. And then you unindent to break out of that. And you can have a loop inside of that saying, while fruit equals, I don't know the example I'm using here, but you can't have like I could do, for char in fruit, print char. So now I've got multiple levels of indentation here. So essentially I'm looping through each string and printing out each letter individually. So everything at this level is inside of this block. Everything at this level is inside of that block, and so on and so on. So Python loops, like if you start to, if you do them too often, it can start to get a little bit messy. So I could say, if char equals a, and then this can just keep on going until you have a massive like cliff going off the side of your interpreter. But that's kind of the disadvantage of JavaScript, of Python, excuse me. All right. What other questions do you have about looping? Okay. So let's talk, I've mentioned lists a couple of times. Let's get into those. So in Python, arrays and lists, the words can be used interchangeably. I think list is the official way they use it, but it is just an ordered list of values. So you can store anything inside of a list, strings, integers, dictionaries, even other lists. So you can have lists inside of lists inside of lists. And once you put something inside of a list, it stays in that place forever unless you alter it. But you can always rely on something being where you put it. So it's like, a pill box. The pills are for, the Monday pills will be in the Monday slot. And it doesn't matter. Those pills will always be in the same place no matter what you do to it. And you can always access a value in an array by its index, which always starts at 0. So this would be 0, 1, 2, and so on and so forth. So if I do, print names 2, that would give me Tom. One thing you may find yourself needing to do is making a copy of a list. there are several cases when you may need to do that. If you need to, you can say new list equals names, and then just do a colon here. Or you can say new list equals list names. And both of these methods will allow you to make a copy of this list so that you can, do different things to different lists. All right, another common data type you'll find in Python are, in JavaScript, they're called objects. In Python, we call them dictionaries. In other languages, they're called hashes. But they operate by most of the same rules every time. It's a collection of key value pairs. You can't access it by an index number like with a list because the dictionaries aren't strictly speaking ordered. Instead, you access things by keys. So, if I want to make a dictionary here, again, it's just defined by the braces. Say, name is Noah, age is 30. And another way to define this, if we wanted to, is we could say user equals, and then you can use parentheses. It would do the same thing. Name equals Noah, age equals 30. And that would still give me the same result. And then if I want to access a particular value, I would say, print user age. Python doesn't allow you to use that dot notation like JavaScript does, so I couldn't say user dot age, I believe. If I do that, I believe it will break. Yep, it has no attribute age, so I have to use the brackets notation. All right. Any questions about lists or dictionaries?
Hey, Noah.
Yes.
Could you explain line 52 again? Like the colon after the name?
Yes. So what this does is it creates a separate copy of this list and saves it to the new list variable. So if I do something like, all right, new list dot append, like so. If I print out the new list, I should see Brittany on it. If I print out the old list of names, it should be unaltered. Get out of here. And the reason this kind of colon here works is it's actually, the colon notation is used for kind of making cuts, is what we call it, out of a list. So if I did something like, all right, print new list, and then put in here, I put like, if I do 1 colon like so, it gave me everything at the index number of 1 and beyond. So it cut out John and just gave me Noah, Tom, and Brittany. And if I did, 1 and 3 or 1 and 2 like so, it would just give me just my name because it's giving me everything inclusive of 1 and exclusive of 2. But when you don't put anything on either side of the colon, it just gives you a copy of the entire list.
Thanks.
No problem. Any other questions about lists or dictionaries?
Can we go over iterating through dictionaries with a for loop?
Sure. So let's see if I did, for, I'll just call this I for now, in user, print I. Let's see what comes up. So it gives me the keys here, name and age. So I should be able to say, print user I to get the values, like so. So similar to when we were working on Roman numerals earlier, you can iterate through a dictionary, and that will allow you to iterate through its keys. So this is actually, I right here is a key. So I want to say for key in user, print key. Is that anything else you're wondering about that?
No, makes sense.
Okay.
So it means like for in we can use for dictionaries and for lists as well.
Yep, it works for both of them. And it also works for the last data structure I want to go over, which is tuples.
Okay.
So tuples are sequences in Python. They act a lot like lists in many ways. If I do tuple 1, and it's defined as being inside parentheses instead of brackets. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I can still access everything at index numbers, just like I would a list. Print tuple 1, like so. The difference is that tuples are immutable. You can't change a tuple no matter what. So if I wanted to say, remove something from the end of this list, for example, if I did, in a list, I could use .pop. But if I do tuple 1 .pop, it doesn't let you do it. You can't remove an object from the list. Something you can do is you can say, I can make another tuple, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I could print out tuple 1 plus tuple 2. And it combines them. But that's not actually mutating either of these tuples. It's just creating a new tuple that's a combination of all the values inside both of them. And
so if you assign that to a variable, would it become a new tuple?
Exactly. So I would say, tuple 3 equals tuple 1 plus tuple 2. But tuple 1 and tuple 2 would remain unchanged. And not only can you not delete variable things from inside tuples, you also can't delete the tuples themselves. There's no way to get rid of them. In general, the main reason you'll be using tuples is they often serve as arguments to other functions. So for most purposes, anything you want to do with a tuple, you can do with a list, but there are just certain methods that require a tuple as an argument. And another thing to keep in mind is if you ever want to define a tuple with exactly one value, you would say, 9, and then you just put a comma after that. And that comma shows that this is a tuple rather than just a value with inside parentheses. If I do that like that, it won't be a tuple. It has to have those at least one comma in it.
Can you do other operations aside from addition?
Probably. I'm not entirely sure which ones you can do off the top of my head. I don't think there's a way to subtract or multiply tuples, but you can do there are ways to get around the non-mutating thing by creating new tuples, like with the addition. And if you go to the official Python documentation, they have a whole list of tuple methods. I can pull one up right now if you like. So W3 Schools is a whole Python thing here. And so they have a whole list of things on what things you can do with tuples. So they have ranges that you can grab. So for example, changing tuple values, there's a workaround. You can convert the tuple into a list, change the list, and then convert the list back to a tuple. So but you can loop through a tuple using a for loop, just like you would a list. You can check if an item is in a tuple. That'll still work. And again, you can't add an item to a tuple. Tuples are unchangeable. Oh, it says here that delete tuple can delete the tuple completely. Never mind. So you can delete the tuple entirely using the del method, but you can't delete a specific method from a specific item from a tuple. So scratch what I said here earlier, you can delete tuples.
No, I have a question.
Mhm.
This is Michael here.
Yeah.
Michael G. I know there's probably other Michaels. I'm pretty sure there are. So besides it being immutable, is there like any real value to having a tuple, because you can still access it by index just like you could a list? And then the only thing I could imagine it for is if like you know that the values shouldn't change in it, and that's when you would use a tuple instead of a list. Is that like really the only benefit of it? Because it seems like otherwise it's just a really rigid data structure that doesn't let you do kind of what Python is good at, which is like reassigning stuff kind of globally like that.
Yeah, I mean, in general cases, anything you can do with a list you'd want to use as you can use as a tuple. I'm not entirely sure what the advantage of a tuple is off the top of my head. There's almost certainly something to do with going on in the background in terms of how the data is assigned. I believe tuples are faster than lists. So if you ever have like a huge amount of data you want to save in a specific order that you don't plan on changing, then a tuple would make sense because it is just faster than a list. But otherwise, for practical reasons, you will generally use a list. And like I said, there are certain methods that you'll find that require tuples as arguments. And it'll be clear when that happens.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Any other questions about the fundamentals of Python?
Yeah, Noah, I have another question. You were talking about like nested for loops and how, it could get really messy with all that indentation.
Yep.
But isn't there a way to avoid that? Like, I think it's continue.
Let's look that up, because off the top of my head, I'm like, I want to say you're right, but I can't remember. And again, this is no developer remembers everything. This is what Google is for. So Python continue. Let's take a look at this tutorial right here. So it says right here, it returns the control to the beginning of the while loop. So I believe continue here literally is just saying restart the loop. Or not restart the loop, but like we can see right here. So conditional code, if condition is true, if it hits the continue thing, it just starts all over. So I don't believe that's what the continue, it doesn't look like that's what the continue keyword does. I'm not sure if there's another way to, undo that those block statements. Tom, is there anything you know of?
What was the question? What was the piece of code? So if there's multiple for loops.
Essentially, how could you avoid just having, indentation off to the end of the line like so?
Indentation.
So if I had nested for loops and if-else blocks and everything like that, if I wanted to not have it be all the way out to here.
Oh yeah, I don't know of a way to do that. If there is a way. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, good question, but that's not something I'm super aware of. Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll stop one more time. Anyone have any questions? Going once? Going twice?
What is the length? Is it len?
Yes,
Yeah.
If you want to find the length of a string or a list or a tuple, you would say, len of tuple 3, for example. All right, cool. So let's take a break, 10-minute break. Let's be back here at 10:50. And we will have our last bit of last talking of the day.